As Lawrence mentioned, and you've noted by now, I am not Rachel Maddow. I am Chris Hayes, Washington editor of The Nation magazine. Rachel is off tonight, but she will be back tomorrow, we promise. We begin tonight with the White House turning its rhetorical firepower on the softest of targets as they make their latest, and they hope, final push for health reform.
We needed a system that worked for the American people, not just worked for insurance companies. The president wants to make the case again for what happens if we walk away. What happens if we start over? If we walk away and start over, individuals continue to get letters watching their health insurance go up, again, 39, 60, 20%.
That was White House Press Secretary Robert Gibbs taking aim at the health insurance industry just one day after his boss, who is also, full disclosure, my wife's boss, led that charge to pretty dramatic effect.
Every year, the problem gets worse. Every year, insurance companies deny more people coverage because they've got pre-existing conditions. Every year, they drop more people's coverage when they get sick, right when they need it most. Every year, they raise premiums higher and higher and higher. That's the status quo in America, and it is a status quo that is unsustainable for this country. We can't have a system that works better for the insurance companies than it does for the American people.
Health insurance companies have clearly become enemy number one for President Obama and Democrats as they try to finish off health reform. And that is a status, it turns out, that the health care companies are not at all happy about. Today, the health insurance industry's lobbying arm, AHIP, acknowledged it's about to launch a $1 million advertising campaign to essentially defend itself. An ad campaign that will focus on, quote, setting the record straight about rising health care costs. With headlines across the country about double-digit rate hikes, the health insurance industry sort of has an image problem on its hands. The only group less popular than Wall Street executives at this point is, I think, health insurance executives. Case in point, today the health insurance industry kicked off its annual policy conference in Washington, D.C. Probably not helping their cause much, they decided to hold their two-day conference at Washington, D.C.'s glitzy Ritz-Carlton Hotel. But the health insurance executives weren't alone at the Ritz today. They were joined by about 1,000 protesters from two labor unions and the group Healthcare for America Now. The protesters wrapped the entrance to the Ritz-Carlton in corporate crime scene tape, and they depicted the bodies of dozens of insurance victims who were killed by big insurance. Among those protesting today was a doctor from Vermont, who also happens to be the former chairman of the Democratic Party.
This is a vote about one thing. Are you for the insurance companies or are you for the American people? The Republicans are for the insurance companies. Let's have a vote right now and see. We need a final vote. The president is right. We deserve, the American people deserve a final vote. Let's see who we stand with here.
Joining us now is Howard Dean, former governor of Vermont and former chairman of the Democratic National Committee. He is now a consultant to McKenna, Long, and Aldridge and Democracy for America, as well as a contributor to CNBC. Governor Dean, thank you for joining us tonight.
Thanks for having me on, Chris.
How much blame do health insurance companies deserve for rising costs?
The biggest problem with the health insurance companies is not just the contribution to rising costs. They really are a heartless industry. They really do push people off the rolls who need health care. I heard a story yesterday. I was in New Hampshire campaigning for Paul Hodes, who's running for the United States Senate. And a lady came up to me who had been pushed off her roll. She got sick. She got cancer. She couldn't work because she was getting chemotherapy and radiotherapy. And the insurance company dropped her. It's just unbelievable. And this happens again and again and again. Today, when I gave the speech in front at DuPont Circle to kick off the march, I held the picture of a 33-year-old who didn't get a colonoscopy when he needed one, and he died a year later. This kind of stuff goes on all the time, and the health insurance industry they really do care more about what their quarterly earnings are than they do about the people who they sell insurance to. If you get sick, you've had it because they'll pull your insurance.
Now, all of those sort of abuses that you're talking about are exactly the kinds of things that in any version of the reform packages in either House of Congress are going to be ended. And yet, at the same time, the health insurance lobby claims that they're in favor of reform. We also know they've been funneling money towards anti-health reform ads. So what sort of reform are they in favor of, if any?
Well, the Senate bill actually treats the health insurance industry better than I would. I'm not that crazy about the Senate bill because they basically force several tens of millions of Americans to buy their product. And they don't really fix the problem as well as it ought to be fixed. But there are some very good things in the Senate bill, and the House is going to go through this reconciliation process so that they can have a straight-up majority vote on this. And the House bill was fairly good. So I'm really hoping very much that the House will fix this. 40 Democratic senators have now signed on to a public option. The obvious public option is to allow people who are under 65 to buy into Medicare. You've already got everybody understands it. You've already got the system working. You could start signing people up within 2 months of the president signing the bill. And I'm very much hoping that that's going to get into the reconciliation bill, and we're going to have that as part of this. If you put that in, that solves almost every problem that the insurance companies can create. When people get choices, they don't have to sign up with these insurance companies anymore. Then the insurance companies will have to clean up their act.
And what's interesting is that you all those sort of movements towards maybe Medicare buy-in or the public option, we now have 40 senators who are saying they favor putting in through reconciliation. You had said earlier in December when the Senate bill was passed, you were arguing pretty vocally, and I thought persuasively or strongly, Democrats to kill the Senate version of the bill. Do you still feel that way, or has something changed between now and then that even if that is the version of the bill that is the core of it, you would be willing to support?
Well, what they've agreed to do is that because the Republicans have been so obstructionist and are now able to kill the bill, we don't have to live with just the Senate version of the bill. We'd pass the Senate version bill of the House, and the Democrats in the Senate have agreed to pass something in additional to that. And if you could put back some of the stuff that the Senate took out, then this would be, once again, a decent bill. I was very much in favor of the House bill, but not so much the Senate bill, because it really does, there's a lot of goodies in there for the insurance companies, and that's not, and goodies for the insurance companies mean baddies for the American people.
Right. Well, how optimistic then are you about the prospects for either Medicare buy-in or public option in this process over the next few weeks as it plays out?
Well, I still think it can be done, and it should be done. It's smart politics for the Democrats. One of the things, if you don't put it in there, Democrats are going to have to explain this bill for 2 more election cycles. If you do put it in there, then as soon as the president, as long as it's a Medicare buy-in, and that's the form of the public option they use, then the president doesn't have to explain it. The other thing, you don't really need you don't really need an individual mandate. We've done all this stuff. 16 years ago, we did most of the stuff that's being talked about in the Senate, except frankly, we did it a little bit better than is being proposed. And we don't have an individual mandate, but we still have 96% of all our kids under 18 with health insurance. We have a sort of a public option. We didn't call it that when we did it, but it allows you to sign your kids up for Medicaid if you make less than $66,000 a year and you pay $480 a year, and everybody under 18 has health insurance. That's that works fine without an individual mandate. Is it better with an individual mandate? Yeah, a little bit, but I think it's going to be a political problem. So there's some changes that could be made, and I think the House is going to make some changes and make it a better bill. So I really want to see something pass. I'm tired of being pushed around by the far right wing of the Republican Party. Tired of Republican senators who put the interests of their party ahead of the interests of their country. We had a chance for bipartisanship. The president opened his hands and he got it slapped, and I think it's time now to have an up or down vote. Let's see who's with the insurance companies and who's with the American people.
Howard Dean, former chairman of the Democratic National Committee, thank you very much for your time tonight.
Thanks for having me on.
If health reform is finally going to happen this year, Democrats still have one giant obstacle standing in their way. His name is Bart Stupak. Democratic Congressman Bart Stupak of Michigan has threatened for the last week to pretty much anyone who will listen to bring down the health reform bill if the anti-abortion language he prefers is not in it. And Bart Stupak says he's not just speaking for Bart Stupak. He is speaking for the Stupak dozen.
There are at least 12 of us who voted for health care who have indicated to the leadership and others that unless you fix this abortion language, we can't vote for a final version of the bill.
As Democrats in the House scramble to find every last vote they can to pass health reform, a 12-vote bloc committed to voting no just might be the single biggest obstacle they face. And so Democrats have apparently started negotiating with Congressman Stupak, who told reporters yesterday, quote, "I'm more optimistic than I was a week ago. I think we can get there." So where exactly is there? Joining us now is Democratic Congresswoman Diana DeGette of Colorado. She's co-chair of the Congressional Pro-Choice Caucus. Congresswoman DeGette, thank you for joining us tonight.
Good to be with you.
In terms of the substance of Congressman Stupak's complaint, he claims the federal bill would allow federal funding of abortion. Is that correct?
Congressman Stupak is completely wrong. The House version that we passed before, or the one we considered before his amendment, had a compromise that we reached in my committee, which kept the status quo in place, because we want this to be a health care bill, not an abortion bill. So we agreed that we would keep current law that says no federal funding for abortion. That language was also contained in the Senate version that was passed. So there's nothing in the law as it stands right now that would allow federal funding for abortion.
Congressman Stupak appears to be negotiating at some level behind the scenes here. Is there room for any kind of deal? I mean, it sounds like there was a deal struck. Is there room for a deal now with Congressman Stupak?
Well, we certainly are always willing to talk to Congressman Stupak and anybody else.